Hello and welcome to another episode of Finding America. I'm Lawrence Brown and today I'm going to be talking about driving, which is a weird thing for me to talk about because I don't drive. And living here in the United States, that can often be a problem. Thankfully I live in Chicago and I have a lot of public transit, but it doesn't stop me asking the question, why do Americans drive on the right? I come from a country, of course, where famously we drive on the left, that is the United Kingdom. And since a lot of the customs here in the United States were influenced by those of the United Kingdom, it always struck me as strange that there was such a departure in terms of the side of the road on which we drive. And so the best way, I think, to answer this very question, just like with all questions that I raise on this very channel, we have to delve in to the past. Now, before I do get underway proper, I think it's important to point out that the burden of accountability doesn't necessarily land with the United States. If you look at this map of the rest of the world, those countries there in red also drive on the right-hand side. It's only those blue countries, predominantly you may notice countries that were formerly of the British Empire, including Britain itself, that drive on the left. Another caveat that we should look at before we get going as well is that not everywhere under the United States jurisdiction actually drives on the right. No, there's one group of islands that bucks that trend, and that is the US Virgin Islands. Their drivers do drive on the left. However, the cars that they do drive are actually imported from the United States. So the steering wheels, much like in the United States, are on the left. So they're driving on the left and they've got the steering wheels on the left. It's all mind-bogglingly crazy and can't wait to visit to see what the traffic jams are like. And so, since the burden of accountability is not with the United States necessarily here, maybe it would be better to start by looking at why my country, that of the United Kingdom, drives on the left. So left side driving, as we saw from that world map a moment ago, is not the norm throughout the world, but historically it kind of was. You could go back to the extensive Roman period, for which there is evidence that the Romans actually did drive on the left, and there's a very good reason for this. When they were driving their chariots, it was much easier for them to defend against oncoming enemies. You've got to remember that 85 to 90% of the human population is actually right-handed, so driving on the left made it very beneficial if you were coming under an attack and you needed to hold something in your hand like a spear. Indeed, contrary to what we saw in that world map, most of Europe actually once drove on the left, but for varying reasons over time switched to the right. One of those was France. But while these sort of changes were happening in France and indeed the United States, which we'll look at in a moment, Britain wanted to buck that trend. It did not want to switch to right-hand driving. It wanted to stick with left-hand driving. And in 1773, the British government encouraged horse riders of the time to drive on the left, or to ride on the left as it were, and this is where the country stands today. The Highway Act of 1835 later reinforced this, making it the law of the land. This is why many former British Commonwealth countries do it to this day. They followed that law, still practiced in the likes of India, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, etc., etc. But like I said a moment ago, contrary to what Britain was doing, there were countries that switched the side of the road they were driving on, or at least standardized the side of the road they were driving on. And that brings us on now to the United States. So of course the United States never really had to contend with Roman chariots or jousting knights. In fact, before the 18th century there was no real standardization over which side of the road citizens of America, the United States, would drive/ride on. But that all changed in the United States in the late 1700s when you started to see these sort of large wagons, often pulled by several pairs of horses, were increasingly used to transport products throughout the United States, and a similar thing started to happen in France as well. That's why you saw that change during that time. And so in the absence of a driver's seat within the wagon itself, you'd often have these riders that would ride on the rear left horse of that sort of group of four horses. And then again, it comes back to the predominance of a right hand among the human population. It would leave that right hand free to whip the horses. Sounds cruel, but it got them moving. And because there was quite an explosion of this mode of transportation, people who were on this side doing the whipping wanted other wagons to pass on the left side. So already you were seeing this cultural understanding that driving on the right side of the road was the way to go in America. But it wasn't standardized, and it wouldn't be fully standardized for well over 100 years. And that happened with the delivery of one very famous car. That's right, Henry Ford's Model T from 1908. Prior to that, the steering wheel in cars, early cars of the late 19th century and early 20th century, were on the right or the left. Actually, often you would find them on the right, just as in the United Kingdom. So the United States has by no means been different in those terms. Like I said, that all changed with the Model T Ford, and from there on, because the automobile industry kind of standardized that left side steering wheel, that then dictated the side of the road on which Americans would drive. And it wasn't, because they could then whip horses or challenge down an enemy. That was all done by that point. In fact, the leading justification given by Ford at that point for driving on the right was so that passengers could safely exit the car onto the sidewalk. And so virtually all cars that were built thereafter here in the United States were fitted with a left-hand steering wheel. And from then on, and to this very day, the Americans drive on the right. Now, personally, as a non-driver, I have no preference as to which side of the road either of our countries drives on. I will say this, I think when I moved to the United States as a non-driver, I didn't have that confusion that a lot of people face, although I did when crossing the road. Nearly died in my first week here. I'm kidding. Now, with cars being a popular mode of transport all around the world for the last 100 years or so, there haven't really been too many switcheroos, as they say here in the United States, over which side of the road one country is going to drive on. I think the most recent one I seem to recall was Samoa. So we may not face this problem too often, but it is good to know, and always good to refer back to this world map to know that in fact not everywhere in the world does it the same as your country. Thanks for watching. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.